Breaking down the Power 5 conferences, we look at the teams who have locked it up and those that still have a shot at winning their conference championship. SEC Championship features number 1 Georgia leading the CFP rankings against number 7 LSU. LSU is going to need an upset victory if they want to get into the CFP. ACC Championship weekend is going to feature Clemson and North Carolina. Both these teams have one loss at the moment, both to Notre Dame. In the Big-12, we know that number 4 TCU is in and waiting for an opponent. The most likely opponent will be Kansas State, a 2-conference loss team in the Big-12. Really, all Kansas State needs to do is to win out, keep this really simple, and they will be in. If they're unable to do that, if they split, they will need Texas to lose at least one of their remaining 2 games. If they're unable to do that, and they end up losing all of their remaining games, then they're going to need Oklahoma State and Baylor to lose one and Texas to lose both. That really means that there's 3 more teams that have the potential to get in: Texas, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. I'll start with Baylor. Baylor is going to need to win all of their games. That'll give them a tiebreaker victory over Texas because that'll be their final game of the year. They'll need Oklahoma State to lose at least 1 because they do not have the tiebreaker with them, and they'll need Kansas State to lose at least 2 as they do not have that tiebreaker either. For Oklahoma State, it's a little bit better, but they got to get past a Texas or a Kansas State tiebreaker situation. So in order to do that, they would need to win out. They'll need at least 1 Texas loss, and they're going to need 2 Kansas State losses to get in. Texas is both the more direct path and perhaps the more convoluted path. If they win out, they're still going to need losses from Kansas State and Oklahoma State. If their 1 loss comes to Kansas, then they're going to need 2 Kansas State losses and 1 Oklahoma State losses. If their loss comes from Baylor, they're going to need everything from scenario 2, but they're also going to need Baylor to lose to TCU to avoid that tiebreak. In the Pac-12, nothing is for certain, but we do know that Southern California, with 1 loss and 8 games played, is definitely leading the pack. However, this loss to Utah could be a little bit problematic for them when we start getting into various scenarios at 1 and 2 losses. But really, all they need to do is beat UCLA, and they will be in. It would help them if Utah could lose as well. So speaking of Utah, they're likewise sitting at 1 loss. They have the tiebreaker against Utah, but they do not have the tiebreaker against UCLA. So the outcome of that USC-UCLA game will be important to them. They will be cheering for Southern California. Oregon is the other 1-loss team. They've only lost to Washington. However, their schedule still requires them to play Utah this weekend. Winner of that game likely comes in to the Pac-12 championship game, regardless of what happens with Southern Cal and UCLA, at least into that 2nd slot. Then we have UCLA. Like I said, they're a 2-loss team. They're playing USC. They'll need to beat USC. They'll need to beat California. And then their preference would be for Oregon to beat Utah, as they would have the tiebreaker over Oregon to get in. But they would need Oregon State in turn to turn around and beat Oregon. So very convoluted in that situation. The other thing they could hope for is that Oregon loses to both Utah and Oregon State. Washington comes in as a 2-loss team as well. Their tiebreak victory is over Oregon. At this stage, they will lose a tiebreak to UCLA. They've got the easiest schedule, only having to play Colorado and Washington State. However, so much is happening with these other 4 seeds. I just don't see them as having a very viable path. I'm just going to call them out for now. Next week, I could be proven wrong. Oregon State, very similar situation. There are lots of ways for these teams to get the 3 losses. I don't think it's very likely, and the fact that they do not have tiebreakers against Utah, Southern Cal, or Washington tells me that they're out. So when you look at it, I think it's really going to come down to Southern California, Utah, and Oregon, with UCLA having a very slim chance to work their way through the tiebreaker scenarios. The Big Ten championship game is probably the least interesting out of all of them, even though it's not settled yet. The winner of the Big Ten championship will be Michigan or Ohio State. They play each other on the last game of the season. The winner of that game will go on and play the Western Division champion, likely Purdue or Illinois. They will be seriously undermatched against either Michigan or Ohio State, and the game really represents an opportunity for an upset, nothing more. So here's my summary. If you really want to see who's going to win in these championship games, it's all happening in the Pac-12 this weekend, in my opinion. You've got Utah taking on Oregon. That will definitely resolve a lot of tiebreakers, and Southern California taking on UCLA. Likewise, that will knock several teams out, depending on how these teams go. In the Big 12, while no direct matchups, really need to watch what's happening with Kansas State and Texas. Those two are more or less in the driver's seat, with Kansas State controlling their own destiny, but Texas looking on very closely.